Yo guys, Punkrat with another video. Classic is right around the corner. It's actually hard to believe. It feels pretty surreal in a certain way. We've been fighting and waiting for this day for almost a decade at this point. The biggest struggle I know many of you guys are having with the release is the decision-making process when it comes to race, class, faction, you name it. To help you out, or who knows, maybe even make your decision even harder, I've made this video covering my experience and my view on the different healing classes within the game. Healing is really fun in Classic WoW. I think in general, healing gets a bit of a bad rep in the WoW community. Some people absolutely detest it, but from a personal perspective, I really enjoy it, especially in vanilla and TBC. It may not be the most complex in terms of healing rotation or gameplay depth, but the interaction between healing 40 targets reactively with just a base heal is my favorite style of healing, to be honest. So without further ado, let's get into the different options we've got for healing in Classic WoW. Here's my healer picking guide. Let's get into it. Alright, first class we're going to cover is Priest. Priests are extremely consistent healers in vanilla, from Molten Core straight through Nax. They're always at the top of the healing meter alongside Paladins. Although they rival Paladins in terms of their healing output, they're more versatile than their blonde metal-plated friends. Priests have the most wide-ranging healing toolkit in the game, from quick bomb heals and flash heal, to base large heals and greater heal, to mana-efficient basic healing with their heal as a core. So that, accompanied by a strong heal over time in Renew, a barrier and power word shield for those panic moments, and prayer of healing for group healing on fights like Veilstraz and others. So that versatility built within their skill set makes them an awesome class to play. It feels really great. You can respond to different situations with different responses, which also leads to even more versatility when it comes to your actual role. Priests can tank heal well, raid heal well, or a hybrid of both. I played a Priest from Molten Core all the way through Nax as my second character when I first started playing vanilla again on a private server about 7 years ago, and I really enjoyed it. In the earlier content patches, mana is a bit of an issue, which affects your ability to perform a little bit. But once Blackwing Lair comes around, you get access to mana regen while casting through 2 items, which unlocks your potential completely, and Priests become the absolute ideal healer. The 3-piece set bonus of your Priest tier 2 gives you 15% mana regen while casting. So while you're actually casting a spell in vanilla, you don't get the full effect of your mana regen. So this effect in particular is probably one of the most important effects as a healer. And this Dark Moon card trinket as well, the Blue Dragon one, has a 2% chance to proc the exact same effect. The Dark Moon Fair will unlock during the Blackwing Lair content patch, so Blackwing Lair is where you achieve your true potential as a Priest. Priests are the main staple healers. That's what defines them, is their ability to just be a great healer all around. They aren't exactly the utility healing class, but despite that, they do actually provide 2 key utility spells. One is only available on Alliance, and the only reason that they actually have it is to compensate for the lack of Shamans on Alliance side. It's called Fear Ward, which is a spell that only Dwarf Priests have access to as a racial. It's a fear immunity targeted buff that has a 30-second cooldown, so you can keep reapplying it on your main tank to avoid a fear mechanic on bosses like Nefarian, Onyxia, or Gluth. This makes Dwarf Priests extremely sought after on Alliance side. So if you want to be lazy and just get a free invite to a raid guild by virtue of being a bodybuilding, beer guzzling, river dancing, Gimli lookalike Sunday church preacher, Dwarf Priest is the obvious decision. And honestly, you can't go wrong with that. Priests are an awesome class, so if that's what you want to do, go right for it. The second utility spell that they provide if spec'd into it is Power Infusion, which is the final tier talent for the Discipline tree, which is again a targeted buff on a cooldown, which increases the spell damage by 20% for 20 seconds on the target that you cast it on, so it can be applied to any target or any party member within the raid that you target. This, however, forces you to spec into Discipline, which isn't exactly optimal, I'd say, until later patch tiers where your gear can compensate for the loss of the Holy Talent. And of course, it's generally a focus from guilds that are looking to speed clear through raids as fast as possible, so they'll be applying it to their top mages and warlocks to just push the DPS as much as possible. When you're killing bosses in under 1 minute, your healing and mana sustainability isn't really a factor. It's all about getting as much damage as you can. Now for PvP, Shadow Priests are tier 1 PvP, probably one of the best classes there is. But Healing Priests, I'd say, are probably middle of the pack. They aren't a bad class in PvP at all. They're just a bit too squishy, immobile, and susceptible to CC in comparison to some of the better PvP classes, not to mention that they don't really have a defensive cooldown. But they do have offensive dispels, party dispels, fear, mind control, decent offensive capabilities in smite and holy fire, so they aren't bad by any stretch of the imagination. But if I was you, I'd collect the Shadow set and respec to Shadow for BG premades if you're planning on tryharding in PvP. Alright, so let's cover the Crusader class that we all love to hate, Paladins. You know, those blonde muscular dudes who wear dresses? Now, Paladins are widely known as the best overall healers in vanilla, at least from the community at large, especially in the private server community. This is kind of true though. So if we take a look at the private server best overall raid logs, the number one spot is pretty much dominated by one Paladin. And in general, I'd say that they probably have the strongest representation along priests, especially in Nax. Paladins blow up in Nax gear, mainly due to how well Paladin tier 3 is itemized. Paladins are all about spell crit. Tier 3 has an absolute abundance of it, which takes Paladins to the point where they're critting so much on their heals that they barely eat into their mana pool. This is because of this talent. It's called Illumination, which refunds 100% of the mana cost whenever you crit on a Holy Shock, Holy Light, or Flash of Light. This talent, mixed with a large amount of MP5 and a strong mana pool based on your intellect, and keep in mind that intellect also gives you increased crit, makes it so that you can literally spam Flash of Light of multiple different ranks throughout an entire boss fight without even stopping for even a global cooldown. So yeah, Paladins are strong, and they get even stronger patch to patch once more crit gear becomes available with the new loot tables being introduced. But it's not necessarily all peachy. Paladins aren't exactly the most versatile and interesting class to heal on. They're pretty one-dimensional, which is the main reason why I personally avoid them when healing in Classic WoW. I tend to prefer a bit of gameplay variety, which I don't think Paladins provide really. As a Paladin, you basically click one button. You cast Holy Shock sometimes, if it's absolutely necessary, but it costs a good amount of mana, kind of like Fire Blast for mages, so it's not really something that you're using on cooldown until maybe later gear levels on shorter fights. Holy Light is also situational for tank healing when you just need to top the tank off, but the core is basically just spamming Flash of Light endlessly. You're the definition of a heal bot. If you write a script to target the most critically wounded target in your range and just spam Flash of Light, that script would probably mimic what you'd expect from most Paladin healers, if not outperform the average Paladin, especially on fights that don't require much movement. Then the bot would definitely destroy you, so it's pretty much a heal bot. There's two reactions to this notion. One person who gets so bored of spamming one spell the entire raid that he decides to reroll a meme spec, or rerolls a new class entirely. And the kind of person who's quite glad to know that he can perform without having to try too hard. Like anything, if you want to be at the top, it's going to take skill and experience to push that barrier and exceed expectations. But just to be quite average and perform on a decent level, it doesn't really take much as a Holy Paladin. So Paladins basically only have single target abilities that they just spam over and over again. So you would probably classify them as a tank healer. But Paladins are generally regimented to either a hybrid or just healing the entire raid with quick flash of lights across the raid like a healing frenzy turret. The next part that I would say is maybe a bit less desirable is something that I've mentioned in many of the other videos that I've made, is blessing buffs. In a raid setting, you're constantly buffing and rebuffing each class with blessings and coordinating your individual buffs across 40 players between all the different Paladins. Each buff lasting 15 minutes, so you constantly are re-upping your buffs. Very tedious in my opinion. As for PvP, I'd say Paladins are probably the best healer there is. That's mainly due to the fact that they have a magic dispel, which Shamans don't, freedom, blessing of sacrifice for avoiding CC, bubble, bop, and I'd say they're probably overall the best spot healers, especially in Warsong Gulch. A pre-made group with a Paladin that's supporting a Druid that's flag carrying with freedoms and dispels is definitely the best setup available. Alright, so now we have the Horde alternative, the Shaman. So right off the bat, if we take a look at the top of the logs, Shamans are pretty much non-existent, but those are the best overall logs, so the best ever recorded performances. If we change it to maybe the best from the past 2 weeks, there's a couple Shamans around, especially in the earlier raid tiers, or if we look at fights that require a ton of AoE healing, they do pretty well. But once you get to Nax, you see less and less of them. So I guess we could say HPS wise or healing performance wise, they're more middle of the pack. But like anything, there's a little bit more nuance than just what you see on meters. While Shamans don't necessarily top the logs, they're probably one of the most satisfying healing classes to play in vanilla. While Paladins have blessing buffs, which as I stated earlier could be a bit tedious, Shamans provide unique buffs in the form of their totems. From Tremor Totem to deal with fear mechanics across the different raids, Wind Fury Totem for the melee group, Mana Spring Totems, Mana Tide Totems for mana sustainability, Poison Cleansing Totem which cleanses their party members passively around them as they heal so they don't actually have to cleanse anyone, it just does the job for them, and a couple others. Totems are way less tedious than the Paladin blessing buffs that I mentioned earlier. They feel way more part of your actual rotation and just in general are a lot more interactive and gameplay oriented. You also have the strongest AoE heal in the game in Chain Heal. And again, the trend with Shamans is how satisfying they are to play. I'd say Chain Healing is probably the most tactile, satisfying heal in the game. It's a personal thing, obviously, I guess, but I've always loved it in a raid scenario, especially in the Burning Crusade. Just popping those chain heals across the raid group feels so satisfying. If you want to focus on raid healing also, Shamans are definitely the way to go. So it's very similar to Hunters in my mind, but I guess a little bit of higher tier because Hunters are just total garbage in terms of their damage. You sacrifice in your ability to compete, but the gameplay is much more entertaining and fulfilling in the long term. When it comes to PvP, Shamans are great. I'd say that when geared, Elemental Shamans are probably the best variation, the top tier version of a Shaman that you can run. Many people think that Enhancement Shamans are broken in vanilla, but this is widely overstated or widely overestimated. Enhancement Shamans are actually pretty weak, especially as gear progresses forward. They lack the ability to close gaps and don't really match up great 1v1 versus pretty much all of the melees. In general, they're good, but not as OP as many will have you think. But this is about Resto Shamans, and Resto Shamans are pretty damn dope. So they're great heal bots, and of course following a warrior due to that Wind Fury element. They're very often referred to as Wind Fury bots. I called Holy Paladins the kings of Warsong Gulch pre-mades alongside a warrior and a Resto Druid carrying the flag. Let's say that Shamans are the kings of healing Arathi Basin. Shamans are a way more offensively oriented healer. There's a really dope resto build that you can run which delves, pretty deep into the elemental tree, which many PvP Shamans will run in order to not have to respec between PvE and PvP. So Resto Shamans have Chain Lightning, Earth Shock to interrupt, Purges to strip the enemy buffs, totems, and in general they just have a great offensive toolkit that Paladins can't really mimic. So yeah, they're the healers that push forward and pressure in the fight, while Paladins are the healer that push back and play safe in the background. That's at least how I view it. Okay, so finally we've got Druids, and like all the other classes, let's go over some log information really quick to just sort of get an idea. So it's no secret that Druids are widely known as the weakest healers in Classic WoW in terms of their actual healing output. And this is largely true, especially in the earlier raid tiers. But once you get to late AQ40 and early Naxx, things change a little bit for the better for Druids, and they become pretty strong, or at least strong enough to at least compete to a decent extent. This is kind of what you're going to see on your average night in Naxx. The Druid will generally occupy that middle ground of the HPS or healing meter. But that's not to say that certain Druids won't exceed what the average represents. But that will only happen with a top of the line geared Druid with a great player behind that avatar. Most Druids are going to be middle of the pack, but a Druid can break the mold, especially in the later raid tiers. The main reason for this is, of course, as expected, the increased quality of gear and how that equalizes their weaknesses from the earlier days. But the main reason is the idol, which seems a bit odd, it's just a damn Druid idol. But yeah, there's two idols that take Druids to a whole other level. The first one is from AQ40 and it's called Idol of Health, which drops off Visitus, that green ooze boss. This idol reduces the cast time of your healing touch by 0.15 seconds, which isn't much at first glance, but if you factor 0.15 seconds on 300 healing touch casts, it adds up in the end and allows you to get off more heals than other Druids around you doing the same thing, of course. Then you've got Idol of Longevity, which drops in Naxxramas off Noth the Plaguebringer. It refunds 25 mana on each healing touch that you cast. So this is a great idol for what it's named, Longevity. You might have, both of them, Idol of Health and Idol of Longevity. Idol of Health will do the opposite, where it'll actually eat away at your mana even more since you're casting more healing touches in total in an aggregate sense, pushing your healing potential forward, while Idol of Longevity will just allow you to sustain casting heals for a much longer time. So they're both really good in their own respect. Druids basically spam different ranks of healing touch between rank 3 to rank 6 non-stop, depending on what level of heal you need on the target. And outside of that, you stack up maybe a hot on your main tank, or both of your hots on your main tank, and maybe a couple hots on your party members or raid members when you're actually on a moving phase and you can't really cast a heal. But pretty much, Druids are regimented to tank healing. I personally always like to keep my Druids focused on the main tank, and of course spot healing the raid as well. If there's someone low HP within range, then of course they can do that if the tank doesn't need heals. It's a pretty decently enjoyable playstyle, definitely more enjoyable in my opinion than spamming Flash of Light all raid, between your hot upkeep and your base healing with your healing touch. But Druids aren't brought because of their healing potential. They, like all other classes in vanilla, bring their own utility to the raid that others can't. Druids probably bring the most unique utility as a healer to the raid. You have Innervate, Battle Res, Mark of the Wild, Thorns on the tank or on the tanks, and probably the most important ability being Fairy Fire, which reduces the target's armor by a significant amount depending on the spell rank. And that's probably one of the most important things that you could actually provide to a raid in terms of clearing efficiently. Reducing the boss's armor values increases the tank's threat and increases the melee's DPS significantly. Druids are the utility healing class that you can't really build a raid without, and honestly, there aren't very many Druids around, so getting a raid spot in a guild as a Resto Druid in my experience over the years has never really been an issue. Now in PvP, Resto Druids are godlike. Generally, you run more of a hybrid build with a hybrid set, kind of like what you'd see in the PvP ranking set or the AQ40 Druid set. I mean, Druids are the premier flag carriers in Warsong Gulch. You cannot make a Warsong Gulch pre-made without a godlike Druid. You just won't be able to compete. If you like being versatile, from stealth cat to a charging bear across the plains, a kiting moonfire turret, a great pocket healer, a damn, speed racer in your cheetah form, you can't go wrong with Druids. So they're fun, strong, versatile, just a really awesome class to play in PvP if you like playing an unconventional hybrid build. Alright boys, that's it for this one. I tried to keep it brief, keep it in layman terms and just give you a generalized outlook on each class and cover the PvP really quick at the end. I hope this gives you a better understanding of the differences between the classes and hopefully makes your decision much more clear going into Classic. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, of course, you know the drill. Thanks for watching and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.